Well, coaches always say the biggest game of the season's the next one, right? And not only is this the next one, but it's the game before you head to Lubbock to take on Texas Tech, like you said. Then you have a bye week. It's also at the midway point of the season, and so it would be really nice for Kansas to kind of get that fourth win. 4-2 looks very different than 3-3. I get that it's just one game.
Pay heed all who enter and beware of this podcast. That's right. This is the Pay Heed podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer. Of course, I'm here with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible. Member FDIC. If you're not already, please subscribe on Apple and Spotify on the audio side. And you'll definitely want to subscribe over on our YouTube channel as well, because we are live on our YouTube channel after every KU football game this season, including coming up on Saturday night against UCF. And speaking of UCF, that's what we're going to be talking about on today's show, breaking down the Knights as KU has its first real true road game of the season in terms of distance, right? Like you go play out Missouri, but this is going to be a much more of a long distance trip going down to Orlando. So we're going to be talking about all of that coming up on today's show. So once again, you want to be subscribed, Apple and Spotify, and also on a YouTube channel. And you want to especially be subscribed on a YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN, because that is how you'll be notified when we go live on Saturday nights after the UCF game. So you can come hang out with us and join us to live react to the game on Saturday night. Before we dive directly into KU football and all that stuff, just off the top here, I do want to mention Kansas basketball continue to make some inroads on the recruiting trail on their side of things. They picked up a pretty big commitment earlier in the week or over the weekend, I should say, from Talon Kinney, one of the top players in the class of 2026. He's a point guard. So you think about Kansas already has now essentially their 2026 starting point guard locked up before they even played a game in 2025. That's pretty cool. There's also a couple more names to watch coming up this week. You can expect an announcement from Trent Perry, who's another four-star player in the class of 2026, and also Davion Atkins. Both those players have Kansas in their top three, so a couple names to watch on the recruiting trail there. Just real quick, Kevin, your quick thoughts on Kenny, obviously being a player that is sort of that true point guard type of player, and what that could mean for Kansas in the future.
Yeah, number one point guard in the class, and he's the type of guy that people have kind of wanted the last few years in terms of a point guard who can really score the ball. And so obviously, Nick, I think it would shock all of us if Darren Peterson were to return to Kansas for a second season. So you knew going into this class, you're having to fill some pretty big shoes at that point guard spot. Kenny looks like a guy that could fit in really well, should be able to run all Kansas's stuff, get his own points off the bounce. He shot the ball pretty well at some events and everything as well. And so really good pickup and a guy that can be kind of a building block as they continue to build out that 2026-2027 team.
Yeah, and Late Night in the Fog, by the way, sneakily kind of coming up in a little over 2 weeks, I think. So that's something to be excited about. Big 12 Media Day for basketball will also be coming up in the third week of October as well, as that starts to ramp up. And we're going to do our best to give you that coverage, as well as coverage of KU football, as Kansas will be heading into the latter half of their season through the rest of October and into November as well. So wanted to give that a quick little update on the KU basketball side of things. But let's dive into KU football here, Kevin. Kansas coming off the loss against Cincinnati. We talked about it after the game, some of the issues that KU faced in that one, and they lose 37-34. Another game where you had the lead late in the game before Cincinnati goes down and scores to end it to get the win. You had what would have been a game-ending interception in your hands on a third down. Then you get a one-handed catch by Cincinnati on a fourth down that keeps their hopes alive. They end up winning the game. Coming into this one against UCF, Kansas now sits at 3-2 on the year, and you start to examine the back half of KU's schedule a little bit more closely, Kevin, and you say, okay, well, you got Texas Tech on the road on the horizon. You're going to be going at Iowa State later in the year. You obviously have the K-State game, which is going to be a big game. You're going to be playing against Utah. Like you start to look around and say, okay, well, the remaining part of KU's schedule features a lot of teams that are sort of in the upper echelon of the Big 12, so to speak, right now. And the exception to that is this week's opponent in UCF, who is a team that preseason looked like they were going to be one of the bottom 2 or 3 worst teams in the conference. They end up starting the year 3-0 pretty impressively. They beat up on Bill Belichick's North Carolina, which, I think now you can kind of take that with a grain of salt to understand that that's maybe not North Carolina might be one of the worst Power 4 teams in the country, truthfully. So they win that game. They go to Manhattan this past Saturday, play against K-State, and it was kind of a weird game for them. Both their top two quarterbacks ended up getting hurt in the game. Scott Frost said on Monday that their status is a bit up in the air. So again, we're recording this on Wednesday morning, so you may want to keep an eye on those availability reports. But if you know me, you know that I'm not putting any stock into any of them until basically Saturday. And even then, I think maybe you can look at it with a little bit of a more questioning eye. And so when you think about this game, Kevin, for Kansas against UCF, you hate to use the term must win, but it certainly feels like, okay, you couldn't get it done against Cincinnati. Now you're going to play against a team that is perceived to be one of the, lower echelon teams in the conference. You got a trip to Texas Tech on the horizon. Like, this feels like a game where you have to turn it around, and you have to turn it around on Saturday night.
Well, coaches always say the biggest game of the season's the next one, right? And not only is this the next one, but it's the game before you head to Lubbock to take on Texas Tech, like you said. Then you have a bye week. It's also at the midway point of the season, and so it would be really nice for Kansas to kind of get that fourth win. 4-2 looks very different than 3-3. I get that it's just one game. But you talked about the back half of that schedule. Oklahoma State, maybe the only game that, looking at it right now, you would say, is kind of one of those, I hate to say a layup, but a game that Kansas should be heavily favored to win. And so it's a tough opponent. UCF, I think, is punching above its weight a little bit right now. And when you look at the roster, I actually think UCF's more talented than maybe we thought they were heading into the season. And going on the road, like you mentioned, it's a chance for Kansas to kind of, you hate to say right the ship coming off of one loss like that, but you don't want Cincinnati to beat you twice. And furthermore, you don't want Cincinnati to beat you twice and then have to go to Lubbock. And so because of its placement in the schedule, because of the fact that Kansas probably is a little bit better than UCF, this does become one of those games that you kind of circle and say Kansas kind of has to have this one.
The continued issue for Kansas, especially in losses, is that it's been those close games, right? It's been those one possession games. You think about both the losses that Kansas had this season, where you were leading against Missouri in Columbia with about 9 minutes left in the game. Obviously, against Cincinnati, you were leading with 1:40 left in the game. We saw kind of that trend from last year, too, in 2024, where you had several games where you were leading by double digits in some cases when you think about the West Virginia game, but you were leading late in ball games, couldn't close out the win. So, it's kind of becoming a little bit of an ongoing trend that is a little bit alarming for what Kansas has had over the past basically season and a half now. And I want to get to this clip, actually. I thought it was important to hear in Lance Leipold's own words him talking about this. Kevin, you kind of asked him the question about this. Basically, does the thought process change at all when you've had this many results go against you in these, tight games, in these one-score games, when you have been outwardly stating that this has been a point of emphasis for you, especially going back to the offseason, right? So I want to get to that here with your question included. Here was Lance Leipold's response.
You guys drilled all offseason on finishing, on situational football, all of those things. Is it stay the course on that step, or is it, do you kind of look at it and say, hey, this may need to change a little bit because maybe there have been a few issues, or how do you focus on that?
I'm not sure exactly how we would change it. The only way we would change it would be not practicing it, and that would make a lot of sense. Again, you'd like it to be executed better. I mean, you can watch NFL games and college games all over, and you could sit there and, critique and analyze how everybody does in the heat of the battle, and I wish we could do better. And there were things in those areas that, again, that we can do better. And I don't want to ever say, again, there's not going to be a particular player. There's not going to be a particular coach. It starts with the head coach. But we've done situational stuff. You wish that it could be magical. Like I said, I don't know if I said this after the game. we've talked a lot defensively, and I understand why. But right now, offensively, we got to be better in the red zone. Okay, we are not scoring enough touchdowns in the red zone. Now we got a lot of touchdowns and we got enough touchdown passes, but we got to be more efficient. And right now we haven't been as great on third down as we have maybe in the past. So those things are a culmination of stuff. We turned the ball over and had a missed snap and things down there that weren't real fluid. So as a head coach, I looked at it as we better just score a dang touchdown. I can't worry about it. Hey, let's run the ball one more time, because somebody probably is going to say in our analytics, people will send me probably something later today that we should have run the ball, made them burn another timeout, and then try to score either on third down or something. That definitely went through my head. But at the same time, I also know that it hasn't been as fluid and easy to pick and choose when you can dial up touchdowns. So let's go call, let's try to go get it and win the game, and let's try to get a stop. So if that puts you under the microscope, then I guess that's what I sign up for. But that's the whole rationale of the situation. Execution, again, I'm not going to go on Trey Lathan or anything, but if he makes another interception like he did the week before, we wouldn't even be talking about that, right? I mean, we're close, and that's football.
Yeah, I would push back a little bit where he says the only way to change would be to not practice it, because I think you can practice it in different ways, right? You can change the way that you prepare for something. But at the same time, Nick, I did think, and part of the reason I phrased the question that way, this is something they work on. This is something they work on a lot. It's something they prepare for. And when you look at the reason that maybe things aren't going their way, he does make a good point. Hey, Trey Lathan catches the ball, you're good. The issue has been execution. And I think that's the part of that answer that you can kind of circle and put exclamation points next to it is, hey, you can coach the right things. The players can know what they're going to do. Ultimately, a guy who's on the football field has to make the play that closes out the game. And right now that play just isn't getting made, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, Lance Leipold said it. Trey Lathan makes that play. It's probably not a conversation, right? Kansas wins the game, and there's not really discussion to be had about that. And this ongoing issue, I think it goes to late game and end of half situations, right? I think my takeaway from some of what Lance Leipold said there when it comes to execution is I'm actually not looking at the end of the game, Kevin. I'm looking at the end of the first half. At the end of the first half, Cincinnati gets the ball at their own 6-yard line with less than a minute to go, and they are actively trying to run the clock out. They are saying, yes, please, we want to go to half. Like, let's just go to half. And Kansas instead rolls out the red carpet and says, no, actually, please go score. Like, it's like the old Midwestern, you're holding the door for somebody and it's like, oh, no, please go ahead. No, please. I implore you, go ahead. And Kansas just rolls out the red carpet and they give up a 50-yard run and it leads to 3 points. And guess what the final margin of victory in the game was? 3 points, right, for Cincinnati. So when I hear the execution part, I'm not so much paying, in this particular game against Cincinnati, I'm not so much focusing on the end of game as much as I'm focusing on the end of first half, where you have a team pinned deep, 94 yards from having a chance to score, and that team is actively trying to go to half. They do not want to score. They are not showing any interest in scoring. But guess what? When you give up a 25-yard run and then you give up a 46-yard run, all of a sudden they can score and they can get a field goal. The same thing happened against Missouri, where Missouri ends up tying the game at halftime heading into that one when Kansas had a 21-6 lead at one point. So when I hear execution, late game execution obviously is important, but I'm also focusing on late first half execution because Kansas has given away 6 points in their 2 losses at the end of the first half of both the Missouri game and the Cincinnati game. And in the Missouri game, it definitely made a difference. And obviously in the Cincinnati game, it ends up being the margin of victory for the Bearcats in a 37-34 win. So that's, I guess, where my frustration lies a little bit. And, like I said, I've talked about this, and I think Lance Leipold's answer kind of reconfirmed my thought process on this, which is I don't know that Lance Leipold is looking at these situations and saying, you know what, I made the wrong decision coaching wise. Like, I didn't do the right thing. I think he's looking at these situations and saying, well, I made the right decision. The process was there. The execution just wasn't there. And in some cases that may be true, but in other cases we've seen where, hey, maybe you should have, looked in the mirror and thought something differently in terms of coaching, right? In terms of the punt at late in the game against Missouri, or even go back to some, games in the previous seasons where similar situations have happened. So I don't know. It's kind of a double-edged sword, I guess, where I think Lance Leipold could be validated in his argument that, hey, if we execute better, the result is different. But also there's other situations where you could argue, hey, the execution didn't end up mattering. What mattered was, the decision to punt, or the decision, whatever the decision may have been. So I don't know. It's an interesting conversation. And obviously you come into this game against UCF where you're going to be on the road, and, if UCF keeps it tight, what does that mean? When you get into another late game situation, right? Does that seed of doubt start to creep into the minds of that Kansas sideline about, oh my gosh, we've been here before, but we can't close it out. And then, you've already beaten yourself mentally at that point.
Yeah, it's a fair question. And not to get too deep into the X's and O's, but everybody knows that I kind of do the little breakdowns on Twitter where I look at a lot of the bigger plays. Against Missouri, it was execution at the end of the half. A guy just filled wrong. He went into the wrong gap, and there wound up being a hole that Missouri was able to exploit for the big run. In this case, Nick, one of the reasons, and I encourage people to look at the clips that we posted from yesterday, one of the reasons I asked DK McDonald about the importance of the way the secondary supports the run when you have a light box. On both of those runs, because Cincinnati broke one run to kind of get out of the shadow of its own end zone, and then broke a longer run that wound up basically setting the stage for the field goal. On both of those runs, Nick, Kansas had a 5-person box. You had the 4 defensive linemen and 1 linebacker. How many offensive linemen do you usually have on the field on a play? 5. So when you've got 5 offensive linemen blocking 5 guys, that means the tackle is probably going to have to come from somebody else, because the running back is the 6th guy. And in one case, he kind of gets pushed to the sideline a little bit. Cornerback doesn't make the tackle. He's allowed to get a few more yards and then gets out of bounds. On the other one, the safety takes a really bad angle and the thing gets out the gate for 50 yards and you have the play there. And so both of those, I mean, you can look at it and say, hey, you maybe don't want to be in 5-person boxes in those situations if you want to point to some of the coaching stuff you're talking about. But the flip side of it is, when you are in those situations, guys have to do their jobs, and ultimately they didn't do it.
There is something else from that particular answer from Lance Leipold that I want to get to, but we do got to take a quick break here on the show, which, by the way, that gives us a chance to remind you that Chiefs fans, you could be on the field at the 50-yard line inside GEHA Field for the official coin toss at the Chiefs home game this season. Visit Chiefs.com/GEHA now to enter to win a chance to be on the field for a once-in-a-lifetime view of the pregame coin toss. Plus, you can score their exclusive prizes, enter for a chance to win at Chiefs.com/GEHA. GEHA is a proud partner of the Kansas City Chiefs. More KU football talk is coming up next.
All right, let's talk some lines with this Kansas and UCF game. The Jayhawks opened as a 4.5-point road favorite, total of 54 over at DraftKings. Right now, the line pretty similar. It's talked up a bit to 54.5, with the Jayhawks still at DraftKings as 4.5-point road favorites. And I like the Jayhawks here, you guys. I think there's an argument to be made that Kansas should be undefeated, if not for some tough breaks in that game against Mizzou, and then the late collapse against Cincinnati. One other note here is that DraftKings Sportsbook has the better number at 4.5, and I've already seen some books move this as we're taping this today to 5.5 and 5. Judging by where this is going, we could see this number move to 6. That's a key number for a lot of these different matchups. And yeah, UCF's overall numbers look better, but I kind of think they showed who they really are in that loss to K-State last week. I know Taven Jackson very well. He played at Indiana for the last couple of years. He's a talented quarterback, and I think he's going to put up some solid numbers over the course of the year. But Kansas is recognizing that with some of these losses, the season could be slipping away. I don't think they're going to let that happen. One key area for KU, they got to get better on third down conversions, and I think they will. I think that number is going to positively regress to the mean. Right now, the Jayhawks 121st in the nation on third down, converting just 31.5%. I expect to see a better number for the Jayhawks come Saturday against UCF when it comes to third down conversion. So give me the Jayhawks, like them as a favorite on the road. Take them at -4.5, especially before that number moves.
Chiefs Kingdom, I have got a question for you. What is your favorite touchdown? Well, for me, I can confidently say that my favorite touchdown, it's the next one, because with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, every touchdown could bring you closer to cashing in. From the first touchdown score to anytime touchdown props or the thrill of live in-game betting, every snap is loaded with opportunity. From spreads to money lines, same-game parlays, regular parlays, you want it, DraftKings has got it. Here's the best part. Bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets instantly. I use DraftKings Sportsbook, and you should too. Your team hitting pay dirt pays out to you. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code KCSN. That's code KCSN to turn $5 into $200 in bonus bets if your bet wins. In partnership with DraftKings, the crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas, fees may apply in Illinois. 21 plus age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. Bet must win to receive reward. Minimum -500 odds required. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/audio.
This is the Payee Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer here with Kevin Flaherty. Of course, we're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. Before the break, Kevin mentioned also talking to DK McDonald, Jim Zabrowski, some KU football players. You can find those interviews on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN, as the coordinators and players had a chance to come and sit down and have a chance to speak with some of the media. So that's something to consider. Also, we are recording this on Wednesday late morning, and just some official, as we're recording, live reaction to some breaking news. We talked about it last week, but the KU-Arizona State matchup in London has officially been announced by the Big 12. This is literally breaking as we are recording, so that's pretty fun. We talked about it a little bit last week, but Kansas is indeed going to play overseas. It is indeed going to be on September 19th. So presumably there's going to be some changes to Kansas' schedule made for next year. Originally, that day was scheduled to be a game against Middle Tennessee State. You can obviously expect that to be changed, I would think. The one thing that I don't love about this that we talked about last week is the fact that you're going to be playing Missouri the week before. So you're playing Missouri on September 12th, and then you're going to be expected to then get on a plane and fly to London and play a Big 12 game against Arizona State. Don't love that. But yeah, I don't know. You got any additional takes from this announcement, Kevin?
No, I think it'll be interesting because, as we talked about previously when we talked about it, the fact that this isn't a week 0 game, right? The fact that it's in the middle of the season and not just coming right after the Missouri game, like you mentioned, but on the backside of things. What does that look like? Are you coming back fatigued and having to kind of hop right back into the middle of your season? Do you get a bye week afterwards? I think the way that it's going to be set up is going to be interesting to watch as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot of logistical questions, I think, involved with that. There's going to be a lot of all that. And, I think as we outlined last week talking about this, from the fan perspective, this could be a great opportunity, right? I mean, have a chance to go to London and have a chance to experience watching your team play in that game. From the football perspective, if you're in, Lance Leipold's office, this is a bit of a stressful announcement, I think, because we have kind of seen teams that don't win when they play overseas tend to struggle It tends to sort of define their season. Florida State 2023 after losing to Georgia Tech and Ireland. K-State has seemingly been able to recover a little bit, after the start of their season, with a win against UCF. We'll see what kind of they do the rest of the year. But again, as you've said, the biggest takeaway for this is not your first game of the season. You're going to be playing, 2 other games ahead of this game before you go and play in London. And then, I would assume you have to have a bye week the following week, right? To recover from that. We saw both Iowa State and Kansas State, interestingly enough, did not do that, Kevin. They had cited that, hey, it's actually, the second or third week after your international travel where you feel it the most. And so we saw those teams actually play games the following week after their trip to Ireland. So maybe Kansas does that too. I don't know. I guess it'll depend on scheduling or how KU wants to handle that. But I guess if you are a fan and you are interested in international travel, there you go. Now you have a reason to maybe get your passport and book a flight to London. By the way, I hate to out myself like this, Kevin, but I've never had a passport in my life. I've never been out of the United States. I don't have a passport. If my mom is listening, she's probably banging on her steering wheel or whatever, she's probably very upset because she has told me many times, go get a passport, even just, they're good for 10 years, even if you don't plan on traveling. But I don't have one. So maybe this is my cue to go get one, I guess.
It's a pretty quick process now to go do it. So I feel like it's easier than it used to be. So you have
Okay.
you have a real ID, right? Like, not to derail the show. So it shouldn't be too tough for you to go get a passport then.
Okay, I'll add that to my checklist of things to do after the show. So that was a little bit of live breaking news. I mean, as we are recording, literally Wednesday morning. So I wanted to get that in there as well with the official announcement from the Big 12 and from Kansas that game is going to happen. So with that being a conference game and overseas. Again, I think there'll be a lot to analyze as we get closer to that game in 2026. So once again, that's September 19th, 2026. Kansas is going to play in London against Arizona State, and that'll be a conference game as well. So something to watch there. But speaking of conference games, Kansas has a big matchup with UCF. I want to dive a little bit deeper into that. And I mentioned it before the break, didn't get a chance to get to it because of this sort of live breaking news on the pod. But Lance Leipold also, Kevin, mentioned his rationale late in that game against Cincinnati for how things kind of transpired was the fact that Kansas's red zone offense has struggled. And just to sort of give you some numbers on that, Kansas this season, Kevin, 23 red zone attempts, 13 red zone touchdowns on 23 attempts. So you're talking about a little over 50% on red zone. They've kicked 4 field goals, so they've scored 17 times in the red zone on their 23 attempts, which is just under 74% rate, which, by the way, that's 114th in the country in terms of red zone percentage, 114th in terms of what they've done in the red zone. And again, if you were to look at just the touchdown percentage, it's even lower because of the fact that that number dropped significantly. So red zone offense has been an issue for Kansas. We actually saw them against Cincinnati struggle where they had that botched snap at one point where they were trying to run what looked like it was going to be some sort of trick play. Didn't end up working. So that's a real concern. With this Kansas offense, it's so funny, right? Because you scored 34 points, you pick up 600 yards, 500 total yards of offense for Jalen Daniels, 450 through the air. But when you start to dive a little bit deeper into the numbers, this Kansas offense is flawed as well. There's some flaws there as well in terms of being able to maintain possession of the ball, in terms of, number of plays. We've now seen Kansas in several games, the number of plays run be a bit lopsided against them. So you head into this game against UCF, and you're going up against a pretty strong UCF defense, actually, when you look at some of the numbers. I know their level of competition hasn't been the strongest, so I think you kind of take it with a grain of salt. They played an FCS opponent, and then they played Jacksonville State was their other opponent, and then they played against North Carolina. So, they beat Jacksonville State in a close game. They blow out North Carolina A&T, who's an FCS opponent. They handle North Carolina, and then they play Kansas State. So, they haven't exactly played any real high-powered offenses yet, but even still, this defense looks like, Kevin, it could be a challenge for Kansas coming up on Saturday night.
And they start off really well. They haven't allowed a first quarter touchdown all season. And they actually hadn't allowed a first half touchdown until the K-State game, and they allowed 2, I think, in the second quarter of that one. And so this is a defense that's pretty good at every level, Nick. Like a lot of times in the Big 12, you'll see like, okay, this is a really good defensive line, but maybe the linebackers aren't as good or the secondary isn't as good. Certainly, Kansas fans can kind of relate to having maybe some holes defensively with some positions that look pretty good. But no, defensive line looks really good. They've got some really good edge guys. Defensive tackles are big and pretty good. They've got 2 good linebackers, a couple good cornerbacks. They're solid at safety. And so you don't have the holes really on defense with UCF. And you do have a couple guys like their edge guys in particular, Nigel Kelly and Malachi Lawrence, that are upper tier Big 12 type edge guys. And so this is not going to be an easy team to move the ball on. Kansas State obviously really wants to run the ball. That's their MO. That's what they do. And you look at it, 6 yards a carry, and you say, okay, job accomplished. Well, K-State got 100 yards on 2 carries. 75 for Dylan Edwards, 25 on sort of a scramble from Avery Johnson. Outside of that, Nick, they were under 4 yards a carry. So UCF can stop the run. They've got guys that don't make it the easiest to throw the ball either. And so Kansas is going to have to be, pretty solid and on their game to be able to put up a lot of points in this one.
Yeah, and a couple of takeaways from that. Kansas, obviously, Kevin, the offense, the one area where they have been very good has been explosive plays. Where, you go back to the Cincinnati game, obviously, with Emmanuel Henderson with 2 75-yard plus touchdowns, 75 yards and 93 yards. He has 214 yards. So maybe this is a UCF defense where after watching the K-State game, you say, hey, you can exploit them with a couple of explosive plays again in a game like this for the Kansas offense. But on the flip side, another area that the Kansas offense has struggled in, and Jim Zabrowski kind of touched on this a little bit too, is Kevin, Kansas has also really struggled on third down so far this season. They have not been very good. They are 17 of 53 on third downs this season. It's just over 32%. That's bottom 20 in the country. 107 in the country.
Shreyas wrote a really good article about that on the Kansas City Star, and one of the sort of jarring numbers that came out of that was, I think he said, when Jalen is the quarterback, so taking out sort of the garbage time stuff, Kansas's average third down is like 3rd and 7. I mean, that doesn't seem sustainable.
Yeah. Shout out to Shreyas Lott of the Kansas City Star and friend of the show for some of that research as well. But yeah, the third down offense has not been great for Kansas. And truthfully, this Kansas offense, Kevin, has kind of lived and died by the explosive play. That's kind of what they've been so far this season. And you're playing against the UCF team that seems like they might be potentially vulnerable to that based off what we saw against Kansas State. But on the flip side, if UCF is able to get you into third down situations, it doesn't bode really well for the Kansas offense overall in terms of what they've been able to do. And a lot of that has to do with a little bit of the lack of running game. And Daniel Highshaw, his status is seemingly still up in the air, possibly could still be out. So you're looking at another game where it's going to be a lot of LeSean Williams. You wonder if Kansas may try to implement more of their quarterback run packages with Cole Ballard and Zeke Marshall. Each of those guys got basically one play against Cincinnati. You wonder if that's a trend that they will try to continue. And, Jim Zabrowski, I think, kind of really overemphasized, hey, we had that not because we don't trust Terry Stewart and Johnny Thompson, but because we wanted to get Cole Ballard and Zeke Marshall out there. But, I mean, let's be honest, Kevin. Some of that had to factor in the fact that you didn't have Daniel Highshaw and you still wanted to use the run game and maybe wanted to utilize your quarterbacks versus Johnny Thompson and Harry Stewart, which is not a huge knock against those guys, but I think that's just the reality of that situation. And then when you start to then think about this even going beyond that, Kevin, is obviously on the other side of the ball for Kansas, the defense has been disastrous, certainly was against Cincinnati. How do they respond? And now you enter a game against a UCF offense that also has similar questions because of injuries, because of the fact that both their quarterbacks, their top 2 quarterbacks, Ja'Cory Brown and Taven Jackson, both suffered the same injury. I believe they both suffered AC sprains against Kansas State. And Scott Frost said on Monday, don't really know their status. So you've got kind of that to work with as well if you're the Kansas defense.
Yeah, so you're trying to figure out which quarterback can be, is going to be the guy. And to be fair, both of those guys came back after looking like they got injured. And so it would seem like it would be easy to say, oh, they're not going to play. They've got AC joint sprains, and they might not. But both of them kind of played through it. It seemed like a little bit. All of UCF's quarterbacks, whether it's one of those two or whether it's Cam Fancher, all of those guys can run. And so you have that added element of a dual threat guy. A couple of those guys aren't maybe as good throwing the ball. Jakari Brown in particular, I feel like has kind of struggled as a thrower. But with the way they use their legs, and then those two running backs, Nick, their running backs are really good. Miles Montgomery is kind of the type of back a little bit that Kansas has struggled with this year in terms of he's got a lot of skill, right? Like he's got great balance. His vision is terrific. He makes yards after contact. And then they bring in Jaden Nixon, who is just absolute, speed, can catch the ball out of the backfield, can do a lot of different things. And so whoever is playing quarterback, I would expect them to lean into that running game more than throwing the ball.
Yeah, funnily enough, Miles Montgomery started his career at Cincinnati, has spent the past 2 seasons at UCF, and has sort of stepped into that primary role. And then Jaden Nixon is a guy who starts his career at Oklahoma State, then goes to Western Michigan and rushes for nearly 1,000 yards at Western Michigan and 12 touchdowns, and was really impressive as a runner there. And now he steps into, as you said, kind of this sort of scat back role with UCF, where he's got that explosive speed. He can be a little bit more dynamic, and so. Yeah, that's going to be something KU's going to have to stop. And yeah, I guess that's really the positive, Kevin, is you would maybe expect that UCS passing game is going to be a little bit neutered in this game because of the injuries to their quarterbacks. But if they're able to successfully run the ball, then obviously that maybe kind of takes that away. So for Kansas, maybe a bit more emphasis on that, but we'll see, because against Cincinnati, I think we talked about it in the postgame, but against Cincinnati, the Cincinnati offense was never uncomfortable. The Cincinnati offense was never in a spot where, they were uncomfortable or whatever they were doing wasn't working. They were able to run the ball. They were able to throw the ball. I know Sorsby got all the numbers, but they didn't have any issues running the ball either. And so when you think about the interior of the defensive line for Kansas, a room that you and I both love and believe is maybe one of the best units on this Kansas team, well, you didn't have your best game against Cincinnati, and this will be a game where you're going to have to step up.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because they will be going against a guard named Guard.
Is that a good thing, or is that a good thing?
AARD. I on one hand, you feel like he's probably prepared his whole life for this, right? Like, just this is not this is not fun and games for him. This is his vocation as drilled from the moment he was born. But the big thing, the defensive line needs to show up, needs to put UCF into some not so great situations. And the other part is, Nick, I 100% agree with you on the passing game being, maybe a little bit neutered. UCF has some good wide receivers. And so the thing that you can't let yourself have happen is have those guys, go up and get explosives against you. DJ Black had a really long touchdown catch against K-State. He's 6'3". He actually ran track at South Carolina when he went there. So, guy who's got great size and is fast. Marcus Burke is 6'3" on the other side, and he's a guy who was like a 4-star recruit, was at Florida, and is now at UCF. And Dwayne Thomas is kind of their little, speed slot guy who's pretty quick. And you look at the guys that Kansas struggled against a week ago, like Allen, Dwayne Thomas is a guy that Kansas is going to have to show that they can cover, because he's somebody that you can get the ball to 5 yards downfield and he can make something out of that. And so you really have to make sure that when UCF does throw the ball, they're not just hammering you for explosives the way that Cincinnati did.
Yeah, and that's a scary prospect, because Cyrus Allen had maybe the best game of his career against Kansas State, or against Kansas, and you don't want to let that happen again. So, yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of things to be aware of offensively, even with the fact that the quarterback situation for UCF is maybe where it is. This Kansas defense has to go out and prove it regardless, because I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm overly confident after what we saw against Cincinnati, right? You saw what you saw against West Virginia. Okay, great. But then against Cincinnati, it was the complete opposite. So you want to hopefully sort of reverse that trend. Let's take one more quick break, and when we come back, we'll get into some players to watch and give us our score predictions as well. That's all coming up next.
What's up, guys? I'm BJ Kissel, founder and CEO of KC Sports Network, and I'm here to talk to Kansas City businesses. If you rely on technology, you need an IT support team that's not just another vendor, but a true IT partner. That's why I want to introduce you to my friend and neighbor, KJ Miller. He is a VCIO at ThrottleNet, the Midwest's highest rated and most reviewed IT support company. They've been in business for more than 25 years, helping companies stay secure, productive, and ahead of the curve. They aren't just IT support, but they provide data security, IT strategy, and cloud software services. They do it all, and their reviews show they do it better than anyone else. So if you want to hear about how ThrottleNet can help your local business, join the conversation with myself, KJ Miller from ThrottleNet, and our resident genius from KC Sports Network when it comes to IT, at least as he's affectionately known by us, Mr. Craig Stout. Click the link in the description to hear how ThrottleNet can help you.
I'm Brett Goodwin, one of the owners of The Learning Tree. The Learning Tree is a neighborhood toy store in Prairie Village, Kansas. This has been here in this location since 2000s, and my husband Alan and I purchased the store in 2023. Alan and I grew up in families where we've always wanted to have a business together. Alan grew up, for instance, his parents had a jewelry store. I worked in a local toy store here in Prairie Village when I was growing up. When this opportunity happened in 2023, we knew right away we wanted to contact them and pursue the store. We wouldn't have been able to get the store without the team at Emprise Bank. From the day we contacted them, they knew what we needed to do, which was very helpful. I would absolutely recommend the team at Emprise Bank to anyone looking to secure a business. We worked with Emprise from day one. They were extremely helpful. They were always great resources. We talk to them frequently. They know the area. They're very friendly. We know who we're going to talk with, and they know what we need to do. We hope we'll see you at the Learning Tree.
This is the Payee Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer, here with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your part in all things possible. Member FDIC. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple and Spotify. Leave us a 5-star rating and review. Share your thoughts. If you're on YouTube, drop a comment, share your thoughts, join the conversation, and also please hit that subscribe button. When you're subscribed, you'll be notified when our videos go up, and you'll also be notified when we go live after every KU football game this season, and eventually some KU basketball games as we get into basketball season as well. We'll be live for some of those games as well. So you want to stay subscribed so you know when we're live, and you can expect us to be live this Saturday after KU takes on UCF. 6:30 kick, so we'll probably be live around 9:45, 10 o'clock, immediately following the conclusion of the game. So you'll definitely want
the Payheed nightclub, right?
The Payheed nightclub is right. That's right. So, and listen, I can't guarantee what's going to happen, at the Payheed nightclub. So you may
Payheed after dark.
Exactly. So you'll definitely want to tune in for that. And the best way to do that is to subscribe so that you know when we go live. And Kevin also referenced some of our conversations with Lance Leipold, the clip we played earlier, as well as the coordinators and players. You can find all those videos as well on our YouTube channel, also at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. Kevin, let's get into some players to watch for this game. Kansas going at UCF into the Bounce House, which, by the way, dumb, stupid name.
I love the name. We just disagree on that one. It's unique and I love it.
Even if I did like it, Kevin, I have to outwardly say that it's stupid.
There you go.
Just because.
Yeah.
But I do think it's dumb. They're going to be going there, late night kick, first really major road game for Kansas. You think about the Missouri game obviously being a big road game for them, considering the rivalry and everything. But you're traveling halfway across the country for this game. You're going into different time zones, so a lot of other factors to consider there. But let's start with the Kansas offense and players to watch. Who maybe are you going to be keeping an eye on offensively for Kansas in this game?
Yeah, the easy one would be to say Jalen Daniels, and so I'm not going to pick that one, even though he's the one that jumps out.
By the way, I picked Jalen Daniels for the Cincinnati game, and let me tell you, he was definitely a player to watch. 450 passing yards and 4 touchdowns.
But by the way, Nick, real quick on Jalen Daniels, over the course of a 13-game season, because Kansas currently is projected to make a bowl, 3,281 passing yards, 42 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, with another 556 yards and 5 touchdowns on the ground. That would be probably the greatest quarterbacking season in Kansas football history. I think Todd Reesing would have him beat on total yards from 2008 would be the only one where he would have but Reesing would not have accounted for 47 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. By the way, we did talk about putting up the clips and everything. Watch the Jim Zabrowski thing, because I talked to him about both the season that Jalen's having and about the ball security issues. And so you'll want to see what you have there. But all of that for a guy that I didn't even pick, Nick. I'm going with Bowden Gruen. You know, I think that the reason that I'm picking Bowden Gruen is, one, UCF's defense is really good. They lost track of the tight end a couple times against K-State. Tight ends had 2 touchdowns. Granted, one of them was the little Chiefs like shovel pass, like inside of the tight end, like they always used to run for Travis Kelce. But they also had like a little throwback to the tight end where the tight end was pretty much standing with nobody around him. I think Garrett Oakley had like a 25 or 35-yard catch as well. Bowden Gruen, we had a chance to interview him this week and talk to him about, you know, I'm a little sad he didn't use the words cloak of invisibility, but we did talk to him just basically, how do you get so wide open? And do you realize that you're that wide open? And he said, you know, sometimes I catch the ball and I turn up field and it's like, oh, like I've got a lot of space here. And so I'm going with Bowden Gruen, the Nick Springer trademark cloak of invisibility. I think he winds up having a few big catches in this game, either to continue drives or potentially even explosives to help Kansas finish up drives.
Well, hopefully UCF does not watch this show, Kevin.
Yes.
Otherwise, they may become aware of the cloak of invisibility and realize that they need to watch Bowden Gruen. Yeah, I like that pick for a couple reasons. For a lot of what you outlined, but also on top of that, Lance Leipold said that Deshaun Hanukkah didn't practice on Monday. It seems like they're kind of keeping whatever his injury may have been a little bit close to the vest. So his status obviously unclear heading into the game on Saturday, which that means Bowden Gruen becomes tight end 1 basically at that point. You know, from a receiving standpoint, as a receiving threat, you still have Carson Bruin, who is a young redshirt freshman that does a great job in the blocking. Obviously, Leighton Keir gets his reps as well, but no Deshaun Hanukkah means that Bowden Gruen is basically stepping into that primary receiving role from the tight end position. And so absolutely, I think that's a good call for you. And again, he's a guy that cloak of invisibility, will it strike again? I don't know. We'll find out, but I like that pick. For me, you know, Jalen Daniels, I picked him last week, and obviously he ends up having a huge game. Mentioned LeSean Williams is probably going to be your primary running back. Daniel Highshaw's status also a bit unclear. You know, the guy that I am going to watch for in this game, Kevin, is a guy that has been hampered by injuries to start the season, but slowly but surely seems like he's starting to work his way back. And that is one Cam Pickett. Cam Pickett is a guy that I want to keep an eye on because Kansas can put him in the slot. He can do a lot of different things. We obviously got a little bit of a taste of what he could do at full capacity in the Fresno State game. He's been a little bit banged up, but over the last couple of games, he has still made an impact in different spots, including I think he had a corner route on a third down play from Jalen Daniels in the Cincinnati game. So I'm curious to see if his role continues to increase as maybe hopefully his health continues to increase also, because he feels like a guy that paired with somebody like Emmanuel Henderson on the outside, who is obviously so electric and is such a downfield threat. You get the ball to Cam Pickett underneath, you get the ball to Cam Pickett in a situation where he can catch and run. That, to me, feels like that becomes your next best offensive weapon passing wise. And so we haven't heard much about him in terms of where his health is at, but again, his role seems to be steadily increasing. So I'm under the belief that he's getting into a better position health wise. And so I'm going to be kind of keeping an eye out for when he's on the field and if Kansas can get him the ball a little bit more.
Yeah, I like that pick a lot, especially since I think that Emmanuel Henderson has done so much explosively, but Kansas could use a guy that's going to help them sort of in that short to intermediate range. One of the great things about Cam Pickett is he's a guy you can complete a safe pass to, and he can still give you big results on it, depending on where he catches it, your downfield blocking, all of those things. And that could be big in this one because I get the feeling that the word is going to start getting out on Emmanuel Henderson of, hey, do not single cover this guy, whatever you do. And so defenses are going to start maybe slanting that way. Who's going to be the guy that's going to catch the 8-yard pass, the 12-yard pass, keep the chains moving? You've seen a little bit of that from Levi Wentz. Keaton Kubecka's coming off of his best game.
Yeah.
Bryson Canty continues to show a little bit more. Had one big catch, had another one, unfortunately, called back for illegal touching. But I think Cam Pickett is, rightly, it sounds weird to say because coming out of the first game, I think he was wide receiver 1. I think he's pulling into sort of that wide receiver 2 spot, and he's really good at that spot. By the way, Nick, Pro Football Focus grades, not everything, but Emmanuel Henderson and Cam Pickett both ranked among the top 12 wide receivers in the Big 12 Conference. So both of those guys, have shown up pretty well.
Yeah, I just want to be clear. Obviously, Emmanuel Henderson will be a guy to watch as well because of how explosive he is, and I'm sure your eyes will naturally draw his way because of what he can do with the ball in his hands. But to your point, if defenses do start to try to really take him away, if there's a safety over the top, you need those other guys to make plays. And Keaton Kubecka was a good mention. As you said, he had a really great game, one of his best games against Cincinnati. So that was nice to see. But to me, out of that crop of guys that you just listed, and why I picked Cam Pickett is because I think to me, he is the guy that becomes that sort of second option who can really make plays happen. And that's not taking anything away from Levi Wentz or Keaton Kubecka or Bryson Canty. I think all three of those guys have roles and have a chance to be successful as well. But to me, when assuming full health, which I think Cam Pickett's starting to get there, he would be sort of that next guy you would look to where he's your next real offensive threat on the outside. Flipping over to the defensive side of the ball for Kansas. Obviously, it was an ugly game for Kansas against Cincinnati. Who are you watching on the defensive side for KU?
Blake Harold is on some kind of heater right now. I mean, when you look at the fact, I think he was credited with 7 pressures against Cincinnati. He's also a guy that's showing up in the run game. And I think that defensive tackle group and the defensive line group as a whole is going to be so important in this one, sort of putting UCF behind the chains where they have to throw the ball. They know they have to throw the ball. And then when they do throw the ball, you're going to want to get pressure. And I think Blake Harold, to me, is a guy that's playing at a really high level. He was somebody that, sort of for a lot of the offseason, it sounded like, hey, this guy may wind up winning a starting spot even, may find a way to displace either Tommy Dunn or DJ Withers. Credit to Tommy Dunn and DJ Withers. They kind of solidified their spots there. I think Harold was a little bit banged up as well, which maybe aided in that process. But Harold is starting to play like the guy that a lot of people felt like after last year, hey, this guy may have all Big 12 potential at some point in his career. And if he has a big game in this one, Nick, that could really help out the back end of that defense and really help Kansas kind of rebound from what happened a week ago.
Something to keep in mind, Kevin, for this game for Kansas is no Bengali Kamara for the first half after the ejection that he had in the early third quarter against Cincinnati. So he's not going to be out there in the first half for Kansas. So, again, you're talking about hopefully seeing Trey Lathan step up, hopefully seeing John Kamara step up, and, even a guy like a Jason Gilliam, Logan Brantley, like you're going to be utilizing some different plays. By the way, Joe Sip, we continue to see him fully dressed. He's got a club situation on his right arm, but we haven't really seen him be on the field that much. So I don't know. Maybe keep an eye out for that too. I don't know. We'll see what happens there.
I feel like he played a little bit more this past game. Like it's just starting to kind of taper up a little bit. And that was what they did with Bryson Canty too. And so obviously Trey Lathan is one of the biggest strengths of the team. He's having a terrific season. Bengali Kamara is having a really good season. And so those are kind of your top 2 guys, but you do wonder, hey, as he gets more and more time, is he able to displace somebody like John Kamara a little bit here or there? Of course, John starting to play a little bit better, starting to find his confidence too. So
yeah, and I think he would have been my player to watch, probably, considering you're expecting him to start with Bengali Kamara missing the first half. But based off of how things unfolded for Kansas last week, Kevin, I'm looking in the secondary. I'm looking at Jalen Todd for this game for a couple of reasons. You mentioned earlier, we're talking about UCF. This is going to be KU's first game facing off against some real length and height at receiver with two different 6'3" receivers. Jalen Todd, I think, is KU's tallest cornerback, or sort of biggest cornerback, I guess, to match up against those guys. Yeah. Then also, something that we talked about in the post game and something that was talked about earlier this week as well is, Jalen Todd ended up playing some safety against Cincinnati. So I think he's a player to watch in the secondary for Kansas for really both of those reasons. As in, first off, A, where is he lining up? And B, if he is matched up against those bigger receivers, I want to see what he does because he's such a versatile player. He's a really, really quality player. Sort of just a guy that keeps his head down and goes to work, right? Not somebody that you really hear a lot from, beyond that. But he is my player to watch in the secondary for Kansas because of how things went last week against Cincinnati. Can Kansas, basically reverse that and do a little bit better in coverage in the secondary? And he's a big part of that. And I think, again, watching him and seeing if he ends up moving around again, because I think my initial reaction, and maybe yours too, Kevin, to seeing Jalen Todd move around is just the fact that, does that mean there's a lack of faith in some of the other safeties in that room in terms of these guys can't get it done? We need to move Jalen Todd to that position. So I don't know. I think there's some different things to keep an eye on there, but Jalen Todd's my player to watch on the defense.
Yeah, I think specifically in coverage, right? Kansas's safeties have had some issues in coverage and did against Cincinnati. And so him moving back there, certainly indicates, you think about one of the touchdowns was basically a corner route from a slot guy. So you have a lot of field to cover as a safety to cover that guy. If you have Jalen Todd out there defending that guy, you probably feel a little bit better about that outcome than maybe you would have with some of the other safeties that they have.
All right, Kevin, moment of truth. Do you think Kansas gets the win on the road, late night, in Orlando, bounce house, as stupid as it is? Kansas, do they get the win? Are we talking about a 4-2 Kansas team come Saturday night?
Yeah, I think Kansas bounces back in this one, and I think that they wind up covering as well. I for a few reasons. One of them, quite frankly, is the quarterback issues that UCF is having. There's a very clear way to attack this Kansas defense, and it's through the air. And we just don't know that UCF is going to have the ability to throw for 300 yards and really attack the team the way that they would need to do that. And so I'll have UCF with 17 and I'll have Kansas with 27 in this one. I do think the UCF defense is pretty good, but I think Kansas, especially the way Jalen Daniels is playing, will get enough to get to sort of that right around that 4 touchdown mark, maybe even low 30s. And I think that'll be enough.
Yeah, in this game, I am basically trusting, Kevin, that KU's offense is going to continue what it did against Cincinnati. And because of what you outlined with some of the limitations that UCF may have offensively, I'm going to trust that the KU defense can do enough to win the game. So I'm going to go with Kansas as well in this one. As you said, I think Jalen Daniels is going to continue his hot streak. He's playing really well right now. This may be another game where Kansas hits some explosive plays, and maybe you look at the final box score and the time of possession and even number of plays run might favor UCF. I think that's a possibility. But I like Kansas in this one. I'm going to go with originally in my mind, I thought this would be a little bit more of a high scoring game. I'm going to go 35-21. Okay. 35-21. I was considering going a little bit even more on the scoring, but I'll say 35-21. Again, I think I'm choosing to trust that the Kansas offense is going to continue what it was doing against Cincinnati, and I'm also going to trust that the Kansas defense, considering what they're going up against with UCF, is going to be able to do enough to stop the Knights enough times as well. So that is my pick, and I hope that pick comes true because, again, I mentioned earlier in the show, but if UCF hangs around and this is a kind of a close game late, I can assure you that seed of doubt will be in my mind, and I wonder if it'll be in the minds of the Kansas players. One other thing, I know we normally do our players to watch. I'm just gonna call this sort of like the moments of the game to watch is end of half and end of game. What does Kansas do? What's their execution? What does it look like? I think a lot of Kansas fans are going to be focusing on that already because of what's happened so far this season. But yeah, keep an eye on that. They call it the middle 8, so like last 4 minutes of the second quarter, first 4 minutes of the fourth quarter, and then obviously the end of the game to see what Kansas does in those situations and if they can execute a little bit better than what they've shown over their 2 losses so far this season.
Yeah, the middle 8 was kind of Kansas against West Virginia, and Kansas pulled away and ran away with that one. And I get West Virginia's depleted. I understand all of those things. I'm just saying it's that important, right? If if Kansas comes out and wins the middle eight, I feel really good about Kansas winning this game. And I think when you've seen Kansas sort of get into these tough situations in the fourth quarter, a lot of times the struggles popped up earlier in the game in that middle eight. And so Kansas finds a way to win the middle eight, and especially if they find a way to significantly win the middle eight, then I think Kansas finds a way to win the game and maybe even significantly win the game.
Any other final thoughts from you, Kevin, before we wrap up the show for today?
No. It's ready for football already. It's a shame it's Wednesday, right? And we just have to wait a few days.
Yep. Saturday nights in Orlando, Kansas takes on UCF. Thanks so much for joining us today. And don't forget to join us live after the game, Saturday nights. We're going to be live on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks, KCSN on YouTube. So go find us, go subscribe so you'll be notified when we go live, and you can join us and many other KU fans live reacting to KU and UCF. So we look forward to seeing you and talking with you again on Saturday night. Until next time, he's Kevin Flaherty. I'm Nick Springer. We'll see you on Saturday. See ya.